Welcome back to the Champagne on Ice podcast presented by the Field of 68. It is officially NCAA Tournament week. Illinois is in the field for the fifth consecutive year, should be sixth consecutive year if that COVID tournament wasn't canceled, as a sixth seed. And we will await to find out who that round of 64 opponent is and talk about this draw that Illinois got, as it is officially time for March Madness, the best time of year in all of sports. And we're going to break it all down right here. Also talk about the Big Ten tournament that was a little bit of good and a little bit of disaster for Illinois, depending on which night you watched. I am Kyle Tausk, joined as always by Mike Farmer. And Mike, happy NCAA tournament week to you.
Thank you, man. Likewise. It's been a long ride, but Selection Sunday was as beautiful as ever, and I've been having a lot of fun looking at my bracket, uh, seeing how I'm feeling about Illinois' draw and all that. So yeah, it's a great time of year.
We will definitely talk a lot about Illinois' draw and both potential opponents that they could see, depending on who wins the play-in game, and also Kentucky, who would be that round of 32 opponent. That entire region we'll look at a little bit, and all that. But first, I want to start with what happened at the end of last week. It's the first time we've recorded since the Big Ten tournament, and Illinois was 2 and done in Indy. They got one against Iowa, 106-94, and then they were done after running into, who would have guessed it, the Maryland Terrapins, who blew Illinois off the floor, 88-65, and to me, the Big Ten tournament was kind of just a microcosm of this Illinois season. The first night, vibes were great. Illinois puts up 106. The offense is humming. You end Fran McCaffrey's Iowa career. He gets thrown out. Everything's great. You come in confident heading into that Maryland game. At least, I don't want to say confident. I'm sure people didn't love that matchup, as did I, but I thought at least Illinois would make it a good game. And it doesn't happen. Illinois gets blown off the floor, plays terrible. That game's over 10 minutes in. And that feels like just about what this team has been all season long. Which version's going to show up? The one that can score with anybody, that can all of a sudden shoot the lights out, that can look like a deep tournament contender, and one that can get run out of the gym by just about anybody in Maryland. So pretty fitting Big Ten tournament. I think would have liked to see Illinois be more competitive with Maryland. I do think Maryland is a pretty terrible matchup for Illinois. I don't know why I picked Illinois to beat them on our last episode. That was foolish of me. It's Maryland of all teams. You smartly said it's not happening, and it didn't. But what was just kind of your general takeaway from Illinois' Big Ten tournament showing?
Pretty much exactly what you said. It's a microcosm of how the entire season has looked since, the start of the new year in January. Just kind of a dominant win against Iowa, a team that was pretty much dead besides Peyton Sandfort going for 9 threes and shooting every time he crossed half court pretty much. Fran gets kicked out to end his career. That was kind of crazy. So Illinois looked great in that one, as they have against a couple teams this year. And then Maryland rolls around the next day. And I said I wouldn't mind seeing that matchup just because it was kind of a litmus test for Illinois that I wanted to see going into the bigger dance, the NCAA tournament. Didn't really I didn't think they would win, and I also didn't think they'd get blown out and the game would be over within 7 minutes. But yeah, you would have liked to see them be a bit more competitive in that one, just in the first 10 minutes or whatever. Tomislav gets 2 fouls, can't grab a defensive rebound or an offensive rebound to save your life. Rodney Rice goes for 4 threes in as many minutes pretty much, and nobody can hit a shot offensively. KJ is the only one doing a little bit of anything in the first half. Merez looks pretty shaky coming back. So it was just overall pretty putrid performance. And you haven't grown to expect that in every other game this season, but it's shown up a handful of times, in certain games at home, especially at times against good teams like Michigan State. You go to Wisconsin and get your butt beat. And that's kind of exactly what happened against Maryland this time around in the Big Ten tournament, as it did against Maryland earlier in the year. So not super encouraging in terms of a actual March Madness outlook, but it's kind of what we've been talking about for the past 2 or 3 months, so it's not super surprising to see.
Yeah, it is unfortunate because it felt like the final opportunity to actually show some consistency, and maybe that team that just no shows some nights and is so Jekyll and Hyde maybe wouldn't have existed heading into the NCAA tournament. You at least, I didn't necessarily expect Illinois to win the Big Ten tournament and enter the NCAA tournament on a 7-game winning streak, but just be competitive to whoever you lost to, whether it was going to be Maryland, Michigan, Purdue, however far you got, to have a blowout performance like this where you just get thoroughly dominated. I mean, Maryland wins by 23. They were up 36 in the second half, so it was even more of a blowout than the final score. It's just pretty embarrassing showing, and it's not the first time that Illinois has had one of those. But after that Iowa game was your fourth straight win. Felt like the offense was clicking. You had your veteran role guys playing really, really well. The only guy that really was kind of struggling was KJ. So the thought was coming off that game, at least for me, like, man, you got everybody playing how you want to play them. Plus you have Morez Johnson reinserted into the lineup. If now you can throw in, hey, maybe KJ finds his footing again, or even just has a KJ-like game, this team could be really dangerous, and maybe we don't have to enter the tournament being like, oh, we have no clue which version of this team's going to show up. Unfortunately, that Maryland game showed that this is still very much a roller coaster team, and I don't envy people, well, including myself. I at least have more knowledge of this team, but casual fans or college basketball fans that have kind of watched a little bit of Illinois or have box score watched all season long, filling out a bracket, trying to figure out what the heck to do with Illinois is probably one of the hardest things in the entire bracket to do, because you could see this team losing handily in the first round. You could see this team going on a little bit of a run. I do think the one thing that does worry me now seeing this result is like, we still haven't seen an extended stretch of beating multiple good teams in a row, like top tier performances. I guess at Michigan and home Purdue to end the regular season was like 2 quad one wins in a row where you played really good basketball. But in terms of like the deep March run potential, it's hard to believe that this team could put like 3 or 4 great performances in a row against quality competition based on what we've seen for the last 2 months. And I was hoping maybe we weren't going to be at that point. At the same time, I do think that it was probably just, there's something to just, it was a terrible night for Illinois. They started really slow and didn't really recover. I think that's another concern that I have about this team heading into the NCAA tournament. That's really happened most of the year too, is if they get punched in the mouth early, or if they get, physically beat down early in a game, this team kind of folds, and this is too young of a team to really withstand it and recover. There hasn't been a lot of big comebacks from Illinois where they've started a game slow like that one. It just has more so spiraled, whether it was Wisconsin, Duke, this one, Maryland earlier in the year. Like, once a team kind of punches them early, this team has shown the inability to really get out of that and rebound and rally, and it more so just spirals into blowout losses. I think that's kind of what you're going to get with a young team that I think lacks some toughness to them at times. But it's just, I don't know what to make. It's the story of the season. You enter the NCAA tournament, you feel like there's a chance this team could do some damage, but at the same time, the trust level of this team stringing together multiple performances in a row is very, very low, and it should be.
Yeah, I kind of lumped the Maryland loss in with all the rest of the losses that we've seen in the past 3 months. Like, I just haven't put a ton of emphasis on any single game result because I don't think that's what this team is built around, I guess. Sure, like the win at Michigan's phenomenal. The win against Purdue at home to close the year is great. Beating Iowa and scoring 106 or 104 points, whatever, awesome. And then the losses are on the flip side just as bad compared to just as good as they were against Michigan and Purdue and those teams. Like I said since the start of the year, and most people that follow the team, I think had the same sentiment. Like wait till March and see what happens, kind of trust the process, see if this team gets expands on things from November at the start of the season to March when they should be peaking, considering they're super young. They have a bunch of transfers that have never played together, all that stuff. We haven't really we've tried to trust the process through and through. It's worked at times. The nice 4-game win streak to close the year before Maryland, that was awesome. You saw some really really nice highlights against Purdue and Michigan and those teams. But then at the same time, the 2 months before that was the low of lows against Duke, losing to Maryland, losing to Michigan State, Wisconsin, all in a row. It's been the same kind of story forever, and I don't think you can reach a point where, like you said, trust this team to win 3 or 4 games, make another Elite Eight, even make a Sweet 16 maybe. we'll have to see about that. We'll talk about the draw and everything in a little bit. But yeah, it's been the same kind of thing for a while now. And I just haven't put a ton of emphasis on, they lose to Maryland by 30, great. They beat Michigan by 20, that's awesome. I still think when the first round of the tournament comes around, it's going to be the same story regardless of what they've done the past 10 games or the past 20 games, in my opinion. I've kind of always had that belief of it doesn't matter what they've done. Like, just show up on the day of the game, and this team could beat any team by 20. They could lose to any team by 20. So that's kind of where I'm at, and that's where I've been at. And I think the Xavier slash Texas draw is really interesting, which we'll get into. But yeah, it's going to be a nail. You're going to be biting your nails on Friday, or you're going to be celebrating, jumping for joy because Illinois is up by 20 in the second half. We're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, just to kind of go over a few things from the Big Ten tournament. Morez Johnson coming back, I think, is the biggest positive that you can take away from this Big Ten tournament. He played 11 minutes against Iowa, was all right. 28 minutes against Maryland. Brad Underwood really gave him some extended run once Maryland had really pulled in front, and he also had to play quite a bit in the first half because Tommy got into foul trouble. He was pretty good. 6 points, 9 rebounds, 4 blocks. Got pushed around a little bit by Maryland's bigs. But the fact that he was out there, got 28 minutes under his belt, continued to be the offensive rebounder that we've seen in both games. Brought a real rim presence defensively back for Illinois. Had a 2-block possession against Maryland in the first half when the game was still somewhat in reach early in that one, which was pretty impressive. And just to have him back and going to get those 2 games under his belt and to see him actually have a game where it wasn't just spot minutes here and there, because it was clear that Brad Underwood was being cautious with him in the Iowa game. I think he had 2 stints the whole game where he came in, one in the first half for about 5 minutes, one in the second half for about 6 minutes. And then for Maryland to see him actually get more of a full game's load under his belt and look like himself, playing with a little bit of a wrist brace, but didn't really affect him all that much. Obviously, his non-shooting hand was still the same rebounder we've seen, and just good to see him back out there because he'll be an important piece regardless of what matchup Illinois gets.
Oh yeah, no question. I said he was kind of bad in the Maryland game earlier. It's to be expected. You're playing Julian Reese and Derek Queen, the best front court in the Big Ten, and it's your second game back. But yeah, he's going to be crucial against whoever Illinois plays in the first round, whether it's Xavier or Texas. Going to be crucial against Kentucky or Troy if we make it that far. Not to get ahead of myself, but yeah, just the motor, as you said, the offensive rebounding, so crucial for a team that thrives when they get offensive rebounds and pretty much dies when they don't get offensive rebounds and aren't making threes. Um, Crucial for that, crucial for defensive matchups. We saw Tomislav get 2 fouls early. We saw him, I mean, he was pretty much non-existent in the Maryland game because of that. He got a 3rd foul as well. Just not the best interior post presence defensively, and Morez is that, even as a 6'9", kind of undersized center and as a freshman as well. So he's just crucial. He's crucial for depth. He's crucial for interior defense, rebounding, just the motor and flying down the court. When he gets a rebound, he passes to KJ, he's flying down the court. He's a lob threat. He's a guy that can just run the court and be a factor in so many different ways on the court. So he's going to be crucial. I'm really excited to see him in his first March Madness game or games. I think he's deserved it, being committed for 3 years and battling through an injury, battling through an up and down season where he's coming off the bench at times, he's starting at times, he's a focal piece of the offense at times, other times he's not, and he's just kind of a spark plug off the bench. So I'm hyped up for him. I'm so glad he's back, just as a fan and for Illinois' sake as well as a team. So yeah, I'm really actually excited about Morez to see him back.
Yeah, he's one of those guys you definitely want to have in a March Madness type of setting because he's just so consistent with what he does that if there is, if your guard play is going awry early in a game or whatever the case may be, or if you are playing a really physical front court that Tommy struggles with sometimes, to have him to throw in there off the bench, he'll get a couple offensive rebounds. He'll probably have a putback dunk at some point. He'll give you all kinds of effort, motor, all that stuff. Like, that's the type of steadying guy you need in a March Madness game, especially with this young team that is so up and down. Morez, continue to say. That's not to say that, he plays great every night. It's just he's always going to give you the same things, even on a bad night, even on a night where maybe he gets abused a little bit by a more experienced front court. Like he still gets you 3 offensive rebounds, 9 rebounds, 4 blocks. It just he's so consistent there. The effort's consistent. I'm really glad to see him just fully get 2 games back under his belt, because that was really what the Big Ten tournament was going to be about for him. For me, was just, can he get fully back into things to where now the restrictions are off, full go, unleash him in the NCAA tournament as you see fit. And I think they're probably at a place, Brad Underwood said on Selection Sunday, that this week is going to be a lot about getting Merez fully back, implemented into everything they do, get him working in their ball screen coverages, get him fully back. And I think that'll be huge for Illinois. I think you still feel pretty good about where the veteran guys are at coming out of this. I know Kylan and Trey didn't play great in the Maryland game. I'm just kind of everybody played terrible in that game, so I'm not going to hold it against one guy for having a tough night there. But I thought Kylan played the best game he's played in an Illinois uniform against Iowa. He was spectacular, made 4 threes. That's a good and bad thing, I think, because he took some ambitious ones early in the Maryland game, feeling himself that he probably shouldn't have taken. But to see 4 threes go for him, I think just is a nice little confidence booster. And had 7 assists in that game, too, was just spectacular. Trey was really good in that game. I forget what his final line was. I think he was at like 19 points with some rebounds in there. And Will Riley continues to play great. He was awesome against Iowa. He was pretty good against Maryland. Most of it was in garbage time, but he was the only one who made any shots for Illinois. 2 for 6 from 3, had 7 rebounds, 15 points in that game. So I think, your starting lineup, a lot of those guys are in a pretty good spot right now. And then, Tommy's been up and down a little bit. There's some matchups that give him trouble, but to have Merez there as another option, I think it is huge. But in terms of what those 3 guys are doing for you, I think you feel pretty good. And I think that Kylan and Trey in particular need to show up in the NCAA tournament, because who knows what Kasparis and Will and Tommy and these guys that haven't been here before, that are younger, that are inexperienced. There's a wide range of outcomes. You're going to need Will Riley to be at his best and all those guys, but just get the types of performances from Kylan and Trey who've been here before in March, and I think that's the baseline that Illinois needs to win some of these games here. I think they're both in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think if you don't get you don't need a vintage Kylan Boswell performance in the first round, but like you need him to show up, forget the turnovers, forget the jacked up threes from 30 feet, unless they're going in. And then with Trey White, just the continued effort, crashing the glass like he's done in a couple huge games this year. And just he's been a kind of steady scorer, even though they don't really run actions for him. They don't doesn't have the ball in his hands a ton, but he flies in for offensive rebounds. He's been hitting open threes in the corner pretty consistently for a good while now. I think if you don't get those guys to show up, you're going home in the round of 64. I don't think there's a question about that, unless, of course, KJ and Will Riley combine for 65 points or something crazy like that. But yeah, I think the story of the season, along with the inconsistency of the team, has been the inconsistencies of the veterans, like including Trey White, Colin Boswell, throw Ben Hummerkaus in there as well. The freshmen, I have trouble blaming them for a ton of the team's issues this year. I think a lot of it kind of falls on the veterans, even though they're all transfers in their first year in the program. Like, those are guys that you just need to show up night in and night out, especially in March, especially in the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament. They did against Iowa, and it looked like a fantastic team performance. Everybody was clicking. The offense was phenomenal. Nobody really showed up against Maryland, including the freshmen and everybody, as you said. But I think it starts with the transfers and the veterans like Trey White and Kylan Boswell, who have been in the starting lineup and have played solid minutes pretty much the entire year. If they're not showing up, I don't like the team's chances in any game, whether it's against Jackson State or Chicago State or Xavier, Texas, Kentucky, whoever we're talking about. I think it starts with them. And yeah, I think they're as much as keys to the game as KJ and Will Riley and Tommy and Merez and all those guys are.
Yeah, no question. I hope that those guys can be kind of the true leaders, those two heading into an NCAA tournament that they've both been in and nobody else has been in on this team. I think that sometimes gets overblown, but also I think when you have a team like this for Illinois, that we'll talk about it in a couple minutes here, you're going to play some experienced teams regardless of who they get. your experienced guys need to be your leaders, and you have to know what you're going to get from them. They have to be steadying presences for you, and they can't be the ones that are erratic and turning the ball over and inconsistent. Like, those have to be your consistent guys, and then hope that a couple of the higher ceiling guys show up with them. I think you're in good shape. Last thing before we talk draw, where are you at with Kasparis right now going into this tournament? 4 assists to 12 turnovers in the 2 Big Ten tournament games. He was a pretty big disaster against Iowa. You didn't need him to be very good because everybody else was awesome in that game. He was pretty terrible. Was fine against Maryland, really the only person that was generating anything early in that game, and then it got out of hand and he turned it over, trying to force it late a little bit. Whatever, but still 6 turnovers against Maryland too. And just not shooting it all that well, inefficient from the floor, and just feels like he's out of it. He's not comfortable right now, and if Illinois is going to make a deep run, I mean, you could win your round of 64 game getting the Iowa version of Kasparis if you get enough other performances. Trying to get to a second weekend or make an extended run in the NCAA tournament, you're going to need a lot better from him. How worried are you about where he is going into this tournament?
I can't say I'm worried. Obviously, the some of the poor performances are very notable, especially when the rest of the team is cooking like they were against Iowa. And I think that's happened a couple times this year, to be honest, when KJ is having a down game and the rest of the team is having a great game for whatever reason. Um, it's not a guy that I can. He's not a guy that I can be super worried about. Like, you see, he was like 2 for 9 against Purdue, and then he comes and drills a dagger shot in one of the biggest games of the year. I think he's still a guy that makes the right play at the right times if he has to. Obviously, for, maybe that plays in the last 5 minutes of the game, maybe the first 35 minutes, he's making horrible play after horrible play. But I think it's a guy where, like, I think you kind of just have to go down fighting with KJ. Like, I think that's been the story, or not the story of the season, but it's happened a lot this season where he's having a down game, you stick with him, and he delivers a huge moment against Missouri, or he leads a comeback, or he leads a team in a huge second half against Oregon, or a great first half against Indiana, like stuff like that. I think when he's at his best, the team's at their best. And I think regardless of the shooting struggles, obviously the turnovers have been pretty bad. And I think as Will Riley has gotten the ball more, KJ's assists have gone down, Will's have skyrocketed. I think he's just been more of a primary ball handler and playmaker, Will has, compared to KJ, which is fine because the team's been pretty damn good while that's happened. But yeah, I think you just have to ride with it. If he has a bad game against Xavier or Texas and Illinois wins that, I would actually be pretty encouraged because I think he's due for a huge game like we've seen a couple times this year. One of those 24-point, 8 rebounds, 6 assists games where you're sold on him being a top 5 draft pick in a couple months. But yeah, the struggles have been kind of not worrying, but like obviously noticeable, and the team's not at their best typically when he's not at his best. So you hope he figures it out. He's a guy that performs on the biggest stage, and this is the biggest stage. This is the end of the season, so I think he'll get it figured out.
And he's a team guy, obviously, and wants to win, but also this stage is pretty important for NBA draft prospects to showcase themselves as well. I'm sure that will be in his mind, and it's an opportunity now for him. Has a couple big games, leads Illinois to a Sweet 16. There you go. He's fallen a little bit towards the back end of the lottery in some recent mock drafts. He can skyrocket right back up by showing out on this stage against some other NBA guards like a Trey Johnson or a Ryan Conwell, whoever Illinois ends up seeing. I think he's thinking a little bit too much out there. I just think he's forcing things in terms of, dribbling into traffic, some passes. What I want to see from him now that Illinois has shown that they can take some pressure off of him, that you can play through Will a little bit more, that Kylan can handle the ball comfortably, that you can play through Tommy more. It doesn't have to be so KJ reliant as we've talked about for the last couple months. I just want to see him play within the flow of the offense a little bit more and just, not feel like he has to take over a possession as much, and not feel like, when the ball touches his hands with 15 on the shot clock, he's got to dribble into a double team and try to throw a cross-court pass. And I just think he's trying to do too much when he gets it because he hasn't been as involved. And I think there's just some really silly turnovers and just forcing things, trying to do too much thinking. I think Illinois has put themselves in a position where they don't have to be as reliant on him. So I'd like to see him be a little bit more loose and free and play within the flow of the offense. Just get what the offense gives to him, whether it's a catch and shoot three, whether it's an opportunity, if he gets a switch, drive that matchup and try to get to the rim and pick your spots to attack, pick your spots to, when you're in ball screens, just make the simple pass. I just think he's forcing some things. I just love to see him cut out some of those back-breaking turnovers, which is part of his game all season long. I just think recently he's had some disastrous ones where it's just like, I don't know what he is doing. And that was kind of early in the year where you had some of those. I thought he kind of cut those types of turnovers out for a while this season, and now it just feels like back to the early part where, man, there's just some really ridiculous ones that I don't think he needs to have. And I don't think he should feel like he has the burden of creating every shot for Illinois, because he hasn't for 2 months now. And if he can just cut those out and just kind of be another member of Illinois' offense, I don't think entering this tournament he needs to be the superstar player on the floor. I think late in the game I still want the ball in his hands, and I think he can do that. Within the flow of the game, I think he should just play and worry about taking what comes to him as opposed to trying to force things, and that would help Illinois out because everybody else around him is showing that they can play at a high level and create, and he doesn't have to be that guy. I still would say, though, that 2 minutes left, season on the line for Illinois, tie game, give it to him, and whatever shot he wants to take, I do feel like he's got a clutch gene inside of him, so I still feel good about that, especially after the Purdue shot. Let's talk NCAA tournament now. Illinois' draw in the Midwest region. They're going to be playing in Milwaukee, which is an awesome draw for them. I'm sure Illinois fans, especially in the first game, will be taking that place over. It'll be a heck of an environment of Illini fans there. If you get to the second round and play Kentucky, I think you'll be competing with Big Blue Nation, who travels everywhere. But Milwaukee, great draw for Illinois. 6 seed, which was kind of... wasn't sure if they're going to get that after losing by 23 to Maryland, taking, I think, a 4-spot hit in the net. Maybe that game didn't even matter to the committee. Maybe they had done enough before that, but the 6 seed was always the sweet spot for me that I wanted to be. Didn't want to be a 7, didn't really want to be a 5, although if you told me they could win the Big Ten championship and that means a 5 seed, I would have taken that. But 6 seed, I am more than happy with. Illinois will take on the winner of the play-in game between Xavier and Texas on Wednesday night at 8:20, and we can talk about both of those teams. And then, as I mentioned, a win in that game, and you would likely be taking on Kentucky, although I know Troy's kind of floating around as a popular potential upset. I don't think it happens, but I think you'd be facing Kentucky. But either way, the winner of Kentucky-Troy would be your round of 32 matchup. I'll start here just by giving a couple general takeaways from this draw, and then I'll throw it to you for your thoughts. Overall, I like the draw for Illinois. The 3 seed, Kentucky, I think is the best possible 3 seed you could have gotten. When you look at Iowa State, who I know they're banged up, but man, I think their pressure could cause Illinois trouble with this roster. I think last year's roster was a lot better suited to face Iowa State's type of defense. I think this roster would struggle against a team like Iowa State. Texas Tech, I would want no part of. I think they're a phenomenal team. And then the other 3 seed is Wisconsin, who Illinois wouldn't have had a chance to play. So I think Kentucky was the best draw possible. It's a team that, yes, they could run Illinois out of the gym. Yes, they can score, they can shoot, they play at a fast pace. But I think Illinois is comfortable playing against a team like that, has the offensive firepower to keep up, and Kentucky's been banged up here recently. They lost Jackson Robinson for the year in February. Lamont Butler enters the tournament banged up. He didn't play in their last 2 SEC tournament games. So you never know. I think Butler will play against Troy, is what Mark Pope said, but I like that part of the draw. I don't like the 11 seed draw that Illinois got, this Texas Xavier winner, for 2 reasons. One, I think both teams are very experienced, especially Xavier, a team that I think is the second most experienced team in the country, a team that could keep Illinois off the offensive glass, or a great defensive rebounding team, and a team that has guards that can make shots off the dribble, make mid-range jump shots, beat Illinois' drop coverage. They shoot the 3 really well. And Texas, a team that is physical, has a bigger front court, has some parallels to Maryland in some ways, has an NBA guard in Trey Johnson, and is also, I think, a top 20 team in experience. Add on the fact that in 12 of the 13 tournaments since the first four was created, since the tournament expanded to 68 teams, in 12 of the 13 tournaments, a first four team has won at least one game in the round of 64. And I don't know the likelihood. North Carolina, San Diego State, I don't love either of those teams, so that scares me a little bit that maybe Texas Xavier is that team. But those are just my very general thoughts. We can dive in a little deeper into these matchups. What are your general thoughts on this draw for Illinois?
I'll give you my instant selection Sunday thoughts. I see the Milwaukee pod. I'm like, okay, great. I see six seed, phenomenal. I see Illinois show up. That's amazing. Kind of look glossed over the Texas Xavier game, and I'm like, who's this three seed going to be? Because I think it was just Kentucky and Texas Tech left at that point. I saw Kentucky. I let out a. I mean, I was hyped up,
Yeah.
dude, with the injuries, and I think it's kind of a similar team to what they had last year, and I wanted to play that team last year. Just yeah, really high-powered offense. But then the defense is so susceptible to, coming out and losing to pretty much any team on any given night. And then Troy, whatever, I didn't really care about that. But I loved the draw initially, and then as kind of similar to you, as I started looking into it more, you see Xavier's hot before the Big East tournament. You see I mean, Zach Freemantle, we'll get into this in a minute, but like half their roster is collecting social security checks at this point. Zach Freemantle is like 25 years old. I know he was injured for the better part of like 2 years. He's their best player. I mean, that's going to be an issue if Illinois does indeed play them. And then the other team, as much as they're reliant on, a top 10 pick and Trey Johnson, like that's still scary. Like I think I'd prefer to play Texas compared to Xavier because it is mostly a one-man show, and they're relying on an 18 or 19-year-old freshman to carry them through huge games in March, which probably isn't the best bet, excuse me. But yeah, I don't love the 11 seed draw mostly because experience. Texas relies on their freshman star Trey Johnson, but then it's Arthur Kaluma who's been in the tournament, Caden Shedrick's been in the tournament, Jordan Pope's been around for a while. Pretty much their whole rosters, they're pretty big and they're just experienced. They've been in tournament games before. They just went through a gauntlet SEC for 3 months. So I just don't love the 11 seed draw, especially because you don't know who you're playing until it's Wednesday night, right? Yeah, that would make
Yep.
sense. So yeah, you don't know who you're playing until Wednesday night, and that team will have just won a game. And if it's Xavier that wins that, they've won like 8 or 9 out of 10, minus the Big East tournament. If Texas wins that, they just had a decent run in the SEC tournament, beating Texas A&M. Like it's just not an ideal draw in terms of 11 seeds, but I don't think any draw is super ideal. Like it's March, you got to beat good teams to advance in the tournament. So we'll see if Illinois does that. I think overall, I like playing Kentucky in the second round if both teams get there, but the first 4 11 seed is a bit worrying.
I would much rather play Texas, I think, than Xavier. I'll
No
be rooting
question.
for Texas to win that game on Wednesday. Now, both teams, I think, present different challenges for Illinois, but the thing about Xavier, the experience. They are the second most experienced team in Division One. You're right. It's a bunch of older guys. It's Freemantle. It's Davion McKnight. It's Jerome Hunter, Dante Maddox. Ryan Conwell's only a junior, but he plays very experienced. He's a really good guard. I mean, they're old, and I mean, they shoot it really well. They were playing really well coming into the tournament. Like you said, they won their last 7 regular season games. Now they beat up on the bottom of the Big East for most of that, but it just felt like they were playing good basketball. They lost a coin flip game to Marquette in the first round of the Big East tournament in what was an electric back and forth game with a lot of shot making involved. I don't really hold that against them. Conwell, I think, had 42 points in that game or 38 points, something unbelievable. He is a problem. And I think that he would be the best player on the floor in that matchup with Illinois. I mean, they're the 6th best three-point shooting team in the country. They don't take a ton of threes, but they are a really good shooting team. They space you out. The thing I really hate about Xavier is they're awesome on the defensive glass. That takes away a big advantage for Illinois. 14th in defensive rebounding rate in the country. Fremantle's a great rebounder. Their front court isn't huge, They'll play 6'11" John Hugley a little bit off the bench, but they mainly play 6'9" Zach Fremantle in the front court. But they're just a really good team, rebounding team. They have a lot of length too on the wing, and I think if they can keep Illinois off the offensive glass, that's a team that I think could pose a problem for Illinois. I think you do like the fact that, okay, Conwell, you can stick Boswell on and feel pretty good about that. And then Fremantle, I think having Merez back will be huge against him, to just throw that a similar body type at him, a physical guy. I think Fremantle can struggle with those types at times. And the fact that you can, play your 5-out stuff, and I think Xavier's very susceptible inside the paint defensively, so you should be able to attack and get some opportunities there. But I just think this Xavier team would be a pretty difficult matchup in some ways for Illinois, and to run into a team that just can light it up from three, can score, can keep you off the offensive glass, is comfortable playing at a faster pace, and has a awesome guard, which is huge in March in Conwell, that can light it up for 30. That would scare me. Texas, I think I'd feel better about that matchup. Still think that the biggest problem with them that I don't like is that, man, they have a lot of guys that are very comfortable knocking down mid-range jump shots, and they take a ton of them. And I don't like that offense in principle, but against Illinois, who is going to sit and drop coverage for most of the night, the fact that you have Trey Johnson and Jordan Pope, two really good mid-range jump shooters, that can knock those shots down. Tremont Mark takes a lot of those as well and hits them. That would scare me, because I think Texas's offense is built to exploit what Illinois does defensively, and the fact that you have Trey Johnson, who is such a elite shot maker off the dribble and can hit shots on anybody, 6'6", and can really light you up. Now, he can also shoot you out of a game, and Texas's offense is very reliant on him. A lot of times, late shot clock, he's going to chuck something up and hope it goes in. Some nights they're all going in, some nights they're not. But this is an older team too. It's experienced. They brought in some transfers. There's a lot of seniors there. Obviously, their leader is a freshman lottery pick, but the guys around Trey Johnson are old, and they are 21st in the Division I and D1 experience. So I think both matchups present some issues. The thing I do like about Texas, though, is the fact that I think Illinois could own them on the glass. They're not a very good rebounding team, even though they have some size. Texas fouls all the time. I think you could get Caden Shedrick in foul trouble pretty easily. He fouls a ton, and Illinois gets to the line a lot. I like that. And the fact that I just don't really like Rodney Terry at all as a coach. I think Illinois would have a big coaching advantage in that game, as opposed to against Sean Miller, who I respect a lot. So I would prefer Texas. I do think both these teams could beat Illinois pretty easily. I see paths to either team beating Illinois. That's not to say I don't think Illinois should be able to take care of either one, but I would lean Texas's way in terms of who I would want to see pretty heavily.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I think Xavier would beat us if they win this game against Texas, and I think we would probably beat Texas. So obviously, I want to play Texas. I just think, like I said it a couple minutes ago, but relying on a top 10 pick, a freshman who's never played in huge games like this, obviously Illinois is kind of doing the same, but they do have a host of veterans like Boswell and Trey White who've been in games like this before. I don't know. I just don't love Texas's supporting cast, even though they're super experienced. They have been in these games before. Like Tremont Mark was a starter on a 1-seed Houston team 2 years ago, and now he's like the fourth option on this team. I think Kaluma was on that Creighton team that made a deep run a couple of years back. Like they've been there before. I'm with you. I don't love Rodney Terry. I think he might be fighting for his job. I'm not totally convinced of that. But I just think another huge part of my Texas, or of preferring to play Texas, in my opinion, it's not the biggest indicator of tournament success, but Texas is a lot colder than Xavier is right now. Texas is like 65th or something in their last 10 games in efficiency on Bart Torvik. I think Xavier's around the 25 mark, which is around where Illinois is. So I would definitely prefer to play Texas. I think Xavier, I think Xavier would present a lot of issues in terms of shooting, and I think it's huge having Merez back, but I think Zach Fremantle would destroy Tomislav, and I think he also poses some issues for Merez too, even as good of a for as good of a defender as Merez is. I think just not having a ton of experience guarding some of the best bigs in the country, and he's been out for a handful of games recently. I don't love that aspect. And as you said, Conwell just went for like 38 against Marquette. He's a guy that can kill you in a lot of ways on any given night. I think Boswell would be a decent matchup there, but it's not something I would. It's just not what I want to see in general. I think going back to Texas, like having Boswell on Trey Johnson isn't ideal, but Boswell has shown that he can hang with some bigger guards, some wings when he's undersized in those matchups, and he can still be his best self defensively. Like one thing I saw was Texas, I think, has won one high major game when Trey Johnson scores less than like 18 points, which his average is 19 points. That's not an insane stat or anything. But if he's off and he has one of those like 5 for 17 shooting nights, I'd pretty comfortably pick Illinois to win that one. Obviously, Boswell and other guys have to lock down and actually make that happen. And then on the flip side, like Trey Johnson, when he's on, he can lead that team to a win over pretty much anybody. If he has one of his, like, he's just knocking down threes, they're running action after action for him, high ball screens, and he's just getting what he wants, and he's showing why he's a top 10 pick. That like Illinois would be so susceptible to being beat by 15 or 20 points in that game. But yeah, I just think not really a great matchup either way, but I would definitely prefer to see Texas in the round of 64. I think most people would agree with that. I just don't love the first four, like Illinois not knowing who they're playing
Yep.
until 48 hours before the game, so that'll be a big issue. But yeah, you just got to show up and compete no matter who it is, no matter who's hot that night on Texas or Xavier. Just show up and prove why you can win games in March.
Yeah, you should be rooting for whoever wins North Carolina, San Diego State tonight. Root for them hard Friday afternoon against Ole Miss, because if the winner of that game doesn't beat Ole Miss, Illinois is in trouble, because 12 of 13 tournaments, the first four team has won. I've made it a rule for myself every year filling out a bracket that I'll take a first four team to at least win one game, because it happens every single season. Last year, I'm usually pretty good at it too, identifying which one, especially once we get the first four results. This year my gut tells me it's Xavier, and I'm trying to like talk myself into North Carolina beating Ole Miss, which I actually think would has a good chance of happening if North Carolina beats San Diego State, which I don't know if that's even going to happen. If they win tonight against San Diego State, I actually think North Carolina could beat Ole Miss to save Illinois from the doom. And I also think in 11 of those 12 years that a first four team has won at least one game, it's only been one. It's not been both. So I know ultimately like there's more coincidence involved than maybe like a legitimate real thing there, but I just hope that North Carolina or somebody beats Ole Miss, because I don't love playing the winner of that first four game. Feels like one of those teams always gets hot, and especially the way Xavier's playing, like you said, they've played really well down the stretch. If they get a nice little performance against Texas under their belt, and then come to play an Illinois team where I think they have some matchup advantages, yeah, it would feel ugly, especially knowing what we know about Illinois' inconsistency. I honestly have gone back and forth on what I think will happen. I do think Illinois would beat Texas. I agree with you. I think it'd be a tight game. If Texas beats Xavier Wednesday, I think Illinois will advance. If Xavier wins, which is who I think will win that game, I have struggling with it. I've gone really back and forth on who I think is going to win that game. I'll save my official prediction for a minute here. I do want to talk just briefly about Kentucky, who Illinois would see. We will record before that round of 32 games, so we'll dive deeper into Kentucky if Illinois actually gets the opportunity to play them. But we talked about it. I think it's the best draw Illinois could have gotten. Now, Kentucky is scary. They run some awesome stuff offensively. Mark Pope is an awesome offensive coach. They will run your tail off and just push the ball, run, play 80 possession games. They're comfortable playing in those. Now, Illinois played in their fair share of those too, which I think works in their advantage. But awesome shooting team in Kentucky. They've got shooters all across the floor. They did lose one of their best ones in Jackson Robinson, but they can still shoot it. They are really, really good offensively, but they are susceptible defensively. They've been terrible in terms of paint defense. If Amari Williams isn't on the floor, who's their 7-foot starting big man, athletic, or I guess he's 6'10", but he is athletic, long wingspan. If he's not on the floor, Kentucky can't stop anybody. I mean, they literally cannot stop me driving to the bucket if he's off the court. So if Illinois could get him into foul trouble, I think they'll have whatever they want. I think this will be a game in the 80s or 90s. I think Illinois has shown they can win those types of games. Heck, they just showed it against Iowa. Obviously, Kentucky is way better than Iowa, but I think that type of game in terms of pace and style is what Illinois-Kentucky would turn into. And I think Illinois has the offensive firepower to hang with a team like Kentucky. So I really don't mind that draw. I think Kentucky's beatable. They've been very up and down. However, they're also very old. They brought in a big transfer class under Mark Pope. I don't think anybody was left over from Coach Cal's team last year, but they are seventh in Division I in D1 experience. So another really experienced older team. Lamont Butler, if he's healthy and good to go, was in the national title game 2 years ago. I mean, you've got Otega Owe, who's a physical, really experienced guard who's played some really high-level basketball. You've got some other guys who have transferred from different areas that maybe haven't played in the tournament, but they're older guys. And I think that would be a really intriguing matchup. I think for me, the story of this tournament for me, or this first weekend of the tournament for me that will determine how far Illinois goes is, what do they look like on the defensive end of the floor? Because they've been so inconsistent defensively. There's been times this year where they've looked like they've been really good, and they've had some really good defensive performances. They trended pretty well towards the end of the regular season defensively up until that Purdue game where Braden Smith and TKR kind of cooked them, but you brushed that one off and said, okay, those two guys are really good. Those ball screens are really hard to guard. But then you go into the Big Ten tournament. Iowa scores at will on you. I know Peyton Sanford had a heater, but boy, Illinois didn't guard very well in that game. And then Maryland cooked Illinois offensively in the first half, unlike I've seen since Alabama in November, really, in terms of a team just dominating Illinois. You're going to need to guard to get out of this bracket. You're going to need to get enough stops to win this bracket. I think Illinois will score. I think they'll have chances to score on any team they play here. I think you've got Kylan Trey, Will Riley, Tomislav, KJ Zolli has the potential there. I think Illinois can score points here. Can they get enough stops to win 2 games in a row here? Because they're going to need to against a team like Xavier, who plays fast, who scores a lot of transition points, who can shoot it, who can space the floor, who's got a really good post threat in Zach Fremantle, who has some skill to him and some shot making to him. An elite guard in Ryan Conwell. Same thing with Texas if you get Trey Johnson. And then Kentucky is one of the best offensive teams in the country. What does Illinois look like defensively? Can Kylan Boswell take out the top guard on another team? Can Merez Johnson provide enough resistance in the paint, help to Tommy, who's been susceptible at times around the rim? Can guys like Trey White, Kasparis, and Will Riley guard? And especially some of these off-ball actions that you're going to see if you play Sean Miller or Mark Pope, who run a lot of really good stuff to get shooters open. Can those guys navigate and shut some of that water off for some of those shooters? It's going to be the story of this first weekend for me. How does Illinois play defensively? If it's the same Illinois we saw in Indianapolis on the defensive end, I think it'll be a short weekend for Illinois. If they can guard, if they can get some stops, if they can throw in some different wrinkles and maybe get Merez fully implemented into some of the soft hedging, attacking screen stuff, I think that's a nice little wrinkle to have in your back pocket. But Illinois will need to be at their best defensively or they're not going to get out of this pod.
Completely with you. And on top of all that, rebounding. Like that ties in with defense, obviously.
Yep.
But rebounding has been not even just with Merez out, it's been an issue for a little bit now. And Illinois is obviously at their best when they're crashing the offensive glass as hard as possible, and then also securing defensive rebounds and just shutting teams out from getting second chances offensively. They just have not been doing that super well. And when they have been, they're winning games. They're going on runs against good teams like Purdue and Michigan, and they're just kind of at their best when they lock down that defensive glass and then also crash as hard as possible on the offensive glass. Like the possible teams we're playing, Texas, Xavier, Kentucky, they're all pretty good rebounding teams, but they're not like, they're not Illinois level when they're at their best in terms of being one of the best rebounding teams, one of the deadliest rebounding teams in the country. So yeah, on top of the defensive issues and locking down potential matchups with Trey Johnson, Otega, Owe, Ryan Conwell, all these great players, got to get back to the bread and butter, which is rebounding. Um, yeah, with the Kentucky matchup, that's one of those teams that kind of like seeing in your pod, as scary as they are offensively. They kind of fit the archetype of the team in March that doesn't have the highest ceiling. Like they have, a decent floor. Maybe they're going to get by a 14 seed most likely, even though they didn't do that last year. And actually, Mark Pope's BYU team lost to Duquesne last year, so it's kind of interesting. I think if there is one 3 seed that actually does get upset by a 14, it's probably Kentucky. Um, but yeah, it's a team that typically doesn't go far with like a top 10 offense and then a sub 50 defense. I know that's a stat I see a lot, and I'm pretty sure Kentucky fits that mold this year. But with that being said, they can still kill you any night. If Boswell doesn't show up defensively, as you're saying, if Trey White can't lock down his matchup, Illinois is going home if they even make it to that game. But yeah, Kentucky does present some problems, especially offensively, defensively for Illinois. But yeah, I don't mind the matchup. If you get some guys in foul trouble, they're already dealing with some injuries. Lamont Butler would probably be back for that game. But as you said, I like Illinois' chances in some of these super high scoring games, these high possession games, quick tempo games. Guys like KJ and Boswell, like you saw against Iowa, the pace that was a literal track meet at times in that second half. Guys were just running, getting past half court, chucking threes on both sides. Sanford doing it for Iowa. Uh, Will Riley and Boswell doing it for Illinois. Like it's probably not going to be that type of super fast paced game if Illinois plays Kentucky, but it could get in that territory, and I don't mind Illinois' chances if it does get in that territory because they've played games like that. They have guys that thrive in those situations. So, super intriguing matchup, kind of similar to the Illinois BYU matchup if it happened last year in the round of 32, which it didn't. Illinois kind of got blessed by Mark Pope's team choking. Could happen again this year. We'll see. But yeah, it's a really interesting pod, and I can't wait for Friday and potentially Sunday.
Yeah, I know I've seen some love out there for Troy, maybe giving Kentucky a scare. I guess it could happen. I do agree it's probably the most likely
I'm not picking that to
14-3.
happen.
I just think it's going to be tough. That Troy team can't really score unless they're having a unrealistic shooting night. Is just the talent difference, the experience difference. I think Kentucky will take care of that. But it would be kind of funny if Kentucky loses Calipari the year after losing to a 14 seed, and then Mark Pope, who Kentucky fans love now, loses to a 14 seed. That would be pretty hilarious, and it'd be back-to-back years of some Mark Pope choking luck for Illinois in their draw. Of course, Illinois would have to win to make it matter. Let's give a few predictions here. Let's start with Illinois. And I honestly don't even know what my prediction is for Illinois, and that's pretty perfect for what this team has been. But I've gone back and forth on Illinois Xavier. I'd love to know what the opponent will be. I personally think it will be Xavier on Friday night. I think they will beat Texas. Once we know the opponent, I'll have a better feel. But in my mind, I'm assuming Illinois Xavier, and I cannot make up my mind on who's going to win that matchup. I don't know if you have a stronger feel, but just for the sake of the pod, let's give our Illinois pre-tournament projection of how far the Illini go.
It's tough. Like I said earlier, I think Xavier beats us, but Xavier has to get to the round of 64 game first, and I'm not sold on them beating Texas. I think Ken Palm, it's like a 75-74 Xavier
Yeah.
prediction or something like that. So, but I think if Xavier wins that game, I do think they beat us, which sucks to say, but I just can't trust. From what I've seen, I can't trust Illinois, and I've kind of been down on the team in recent weeks, even as they've gone on a win streak. I've still kind of been in the camp that's like I'm not picking them to win a single one of these games. I think you just gotta they show up, you see how they do, and that's pretty much it. Like I have no faith in them really. That being said, I think if Texas wins that first four game on Wednesday, I think Illinois beats Texas. I think Kentucky would beat Troy, setting up an Illinois-Kentucky matchup in the round of 32. And I don't know, man. I think if we beat Texas, we probably beat Kentucky, which is crazy to say. My range of picks based on a first four game. But yeah, I don't trust Kentucky with their injuries and with that archetype of team, as I was saying, the really potent offense and then the really kind of lackluster defense. I don't trust that. So I think Xavier wins the first four game. Illinois is going home on Friday. I think if Texas somehow pulls that game out, Illinois is going to the second weekend, probably losing to Tennessee in that Sweet 16 game. But we have played them before and we stuck with them, so I'm getting ahead of myself considering I'm picking around a 64 loss in one scenario and a potentially dangerous like Illinois played that Tennessee team before if both teams get there in that Sweet 16 game and they stuck with them in Champaign, granted. But yeah, I think Illinois would still probably lose that game, go home in the Sweet 16, but that's kind of my take right now.
Yeah, Kentucky's the type of team that I would want to fade in most brackets. They profile as a team that I would hate to pick very far. Illinois, though, I would, if I wasn't so locked into Illinois, I would be terrified to pick them to win a single game. It's just, yeah, it's tough. I think that Xavier matchup is going to be difficult. I just feel like I don't know. I think Illinois can get that first game. I know, like, going in 2 years ago, we've made a lot of parallels this year to that 22-23 team that was were they a 9 seed that ended up playing 8 seed
Yeah.
Arkansas, or an 8 seed playing 9 seed Arkansas, whatever the case was. Uh, I know going into that tournament, I felt awful. I'm like, Arkansas will win. I just have no faith in Illinois. I have a little bit more faith in this team in like a single game setting against a team they're better than, they are a better team than Xavier or Texas. I think a fitting end to this team's season probably is win a pretty close game in that first round game, be all excited to watch that Kentucky game, feel like you can beat Kentucky. Kentucky scores 103 and pretty easily takes care of Illinois and goes to the Sweet 16. I think that's where I'm going to land on my unofficial prediction. Illinois gets one game and then can't stop Kentucky and goes out with a whimper in the round of 32, and that feels like kind of the fitting end of this team's season. So I'll go with that, although I am with you. I would be nervous about Xavier. I'm rooting for Texas on Wednesday night, even though I bet on Xavier. So I can't lose. I'll either win money or I'll win a better matchup for Illinois. Let's close it out. Just we don't have to go through the whole bracket, but like maybe let's give like a final four pick and maybe just throw some stuff out there from first round upsets or something like that. Wherever you want to go with this. I haven't really finished up my bracket, but I kind of have a gut feel. But if you want to give any just overall bracket predictions just for the fun, go ahead, and then I'll do the same.
All right. I have my bracket's still very much a work in progress as yours is. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. I have a feel. My one non-negotiable is, I mean, Duke is making the Final Four minimum. I think there's nobody in that region that comes close to them. Um, Other than that, I think my other kind of non-negotiable, which is weird to be honest, I think Texas Tech makes the Final Four in that bottom left region. I'll say this. I think I've had this opinion for like a week now. I think this Florida team, as good as they are, reminds me almost too much of 2021 Illinois. I'm not saying like they don't have a Loyola-like matchup in the round of 32. I think they'll play UConn or Oklahoma. I mean, maybe UConn could go crazy and beat Florida, but I don't see that happening. But I think Florida is a team that, like, as hot as they are, I think I don't trust a younger head coach like Todd Golden, who hasn't really won a ton of tournament games. Obviously, some guys on that team have, like Elijah Martin was in the Final Four a couple years back, but I just think like nothing really points me to that take besides like young head coach and them being hot. But I don't think they make the Final Four. I
The
think they bow
problem with
out.
them is like I love this Florida team. Like going into the tournament, I was like I might have to pick this team to win the national title. I think they have everything you possibly could want going into March with the three guards who can all go get you a bucket with a great defensive and rebounding bigs. Problem is their region's a nightmare. Like they got by far the toughest region. They could lose like any game other than the first one, and I wouldn't be surprised. That's the problem with them.
Yeah, I'm also kind of just like fading the public and the media, who's I think they're the second most popular title pick. So I got Duke and Texas Tech in the Final Four. I think that top left region, I'm gonna do probably gonna end up doing Auburn. If not, sleeper pick Iowa State. Nobody's picking them. I think it's just kind of a like a value pick. This is, I mean, whatever. And then our region, like I haven't even thought about Illinois until recording this pod. I think the winner of the potential Houston Gonzaga game is going to the Final Four. I think if Houston wins that, like I don't know who I'm picking in that game. I think if Houston wins it, they might just win the championship. I think if Gonzaga wins it, they probably go to the Final Four or lose to Duke. But that's kind of where I'm at. I think if VCU is a sleeper Elite Eight pick, like I'm probably going to pick that, even though it's a bit insane. And then like first round upsets, I think I'm kind of sold on UCSD beating Michigan. I know
Yep.
that's the super popular one. I know Colorado State's actually favored over 5 seed Memphis. That's another good one. VCU, as I said, I think they beat BYU. And then I don't know. I hate picking St. Mary's every year. I seem to do it every year, even though I tell myself not to do it. I think St. Mary's has a decent little draw there in the 2-10-7-15 pod with Alabama and Vanderbilt. I think they might make a run to the Sweet 16 and probably lose to VCU. But yeah, I'm kind of a couple one seeds in the Final Four. I think I'll have Duke or Houston winning it in the end, but that's where I'm at.
My gut tells me this year, I hate doing it. I always want to find like the chaos part of the bracket and like get cute with stuff. And I'm usually, it always happens almost every year. I just never get it right. Not that most people don't. I mean, who would have picked NC State to go to the Final Four last year? Who was picking Florida Atlantic to go to the Final Four? Stuff like that always happens. My gut just tells me this is going to be a chalky year. I don't know what it is. I just think these 4-1 seeds are outstanding. I don't have all four of them in the Final Four. I want to kind of blow up that Auburn region a little bit, but my gut's telling me this just ends up, everybody tries to pick the Gonzaga, which I think could happen. That reminds me a little bit. I know you said Florida reminds you a little bit of the Illinois team, which I can see a little bit. I think Houston's draw reminds me a lot of that
Oh
Illinois team,
yeah.
who now you're playing a top 10 Ken Pom team as an 8 seed who has tournament experience and it's just Gonzaga's a nightmare for Houston to draw there if they even win that first game. I got Duke winning the title. I just think this Duke team is awesome. They're really good. Cooper Flag's fine, I think. They're awesome defensively. They got enough guards, but Flag is the best player in the country. You type in, Torvik has their similar efficiency profile to past teams that you can play with. The most similar team to this year's Duke team, last year's UConn team, who cruised to a national title. I just think Duke's winning the title. That's my title pick. Looking across here, yeah, I actually really like that Iowa State call out. I've been debating going with them. I want to blow up Auburn's region a little bit because I just think Auburn's a little vulnerable. They came into the tournament cold. No team has ever won the national title, losing 3 of their last 4. I just think I don't love their guards all that much. I think they're a little bit exposed now, and Iowa State literally lost on a tip and buzzer beater in Maui to them when those two played and were leading for a ton of that game. If Iowa State can get past Michigan State, I don't hate that. Looking across the bracket here, I just love Florida too much that I feel like I'm probably going to take them to play Duke in the national title game. I just think there's no weaknesses on that team. That's the chalkiest national title game ever, but I'm going to be the chalk guy this year. Upset wise, I agree with you. The UCSD upset, I'm taking that. Everybody's taking it. I don't care. It feels like John Morant Murray State over Marquette, where like everybody's bracket had that, and it just happened. They won by 15. I don't know. I wanted to fade Michigan all year long. I think that's a terrible matchup for them. I also kind of like Yale over A&M on that side to get a UCSD Yale matchup. The Ivy champs, you look at what the Ivy League has done in the tournament, they always are competitive. Either they win a game or it's a competitive game. This Yale team isn't going to get owned on the glass like A&M does to most teams, and they can shoot. Their defense gives up the most threes in the country. A&M is awful shooting the ball. You just have to hope they don't offensive rebound all of them. I don't hate that. I kind of like St. Mary's too. I'm not going to lie. Even though I hate picking them, I think Vanderbilt sucks. So I think they'll win that game. And then it's like the two most opposite basketball teams ever, Alabama and St. Mary's. You couldn't find two more opposite playing styles than them, which I think actually could work in St. Mary's favor. Let's see here. I haven't even finished this bracket. Is there anything else? Um,
What
I
about Big
wanted
Ten teams?
Yeah, I wanted to pick High Point over Purdue because High Point's offense is awesome and Purdue can't guard. Then you look at it and it's like, how does Purdue not score 120 and Braden Smith have 37 in that game? So I'm a little off that one. Yeah, Big Ten team wise, Maryland. I think they got a solid draw. I would be interested to see Florida, Maryland in the Sweet 16. I think Michigan is even if they beat UCSD, I think they would lose the next game to A&M if they do get past Yale. I'm not buying Purdue. I kind of like Wisconsin. I've been on Wisconsin all season long. I think they have a lot of parallels to last year's Illinois team in a lot of what they do. I know they couldn't make a shot to save their life in the Big Ten championship, but I have them in the Elite Eight right now. I have them beating VCU. I like that pick in the first round. And then, yeah, I kind of think that St. Mary's Alabama game could get a little dicey. And then I just think Wisconsin with Tanji and with that offense, I think they're probably the Big Ten team I'm buying the most. What about you?
Yeah, I think the Big Ten kind of caps out at a couple Sweet 16 appearances this year. I think Michigan State probably gets there. I don't like Wisconsin getting there. As I said, I think VCU goes on a pretty deep run here. Illinois might get there. Like they might be one of those teams. I think Purdue does get there, beating High Point and then probably beating Clemson. But I think that's about it. Like I don't love the Elite Eight matchups in any of those potential regions. I think a lot of the teams just don't have ceilings of Final Four teams, of national championship teams. So I think it's kind of another down year for the Big Ten, even if they get two, three, four teams to the Sweet 16. Just not super high on them getting much further. But yeah, that's about it. Like I think Illinois has a decent draw. I think I love looking at the bracket. I think there's a lot of fun to be had this year, even if a lot of one seeds make it pretty far. But yeah, I just can't wait for this next week.
Yeah, the problem with the Big Ten, I think there's a handful of teams that could make little runs, but once they get deep enough, I think they all get destroyed. Maybe with the exception of Michigan State. Like I personally think Florida would take care of Maryland, but even like Maryland would have to go through Florida and then either Texas Tech or St. John's. I don't think that would happen. I think Wisconsin would lose to Duke by 28 if they actually got to the Elite Eight, like I have them getting there. I think Illinois would have a real tough time with Houston if they miraculously made it to the Elite Eight. I think that would be an ugly offensive display. I even think Gonzaga would be problematic for Illinois. I mean, yeah, I think Purdue would get crushed by Houston personally if they got to the Sweet 16 there. Like the only one I could see like hanging around having a chance is Michigan State. I think they'd be competitive with Auburn, but I don't really trust them either. I think Michigan would get murdered by Auburn if they got to the Sweet 16. The Big Ten's got a bunch of decent, pretty good teams. All of them are so far below like the elite teams, I think, other than Michigan State, that it's like I think the Big Ten will once again go another year without having a national champion. Make that 25 years in a row. But yeah, that should probably wrap things up. We'll be back regardless of what happens in that round of 64 game. Illinois late tip Friday night, 8:45 Central, approximately. Might even be later than that, depending on how late the Kentucky Troy game goes. We'll find out an opponent on Wednesday night, but we'll be back after that game, hopefully previewing a matchup with Kentucky in the round of 32. Otherwise, kind of putting a wrap on the season for Illinois if they can't get past that round of 64 games. So make sure you tune into that and follow along with us. We are on X at Champagne on Ice. Subscribe to the Field of 68 Podcast Network YouTube channel. Find us wherever else you get your podcasts as well. Hope everybody enjoys these first couple days of hoops. It is the best 2 days of sports of the year, in my opinion. Just unbelievable round the clock basketball, and hope everybody enjoys the Illinois game on Friday night. If you're going there to Milwaukee, have a great time. I expect a lot of Illini fans will be there. I was thinking about going, ended up deciding, nah, I want to watch every game at home, and I'll be fine here. But we'll see. If Illinois can get to Indy for that Sweet 16 Elite Eight, I might be getting over there. But if you're going to Milwaukee, have a great time. We will talk